Now, at this point, you might ask, is philosophy really relevant today? Why should we spend some time trying to find answers or discuss these theories or concepts when there are so many urgent things to do with our time? And if you have come across someone saying or spreading those ideas, you're not alone. Even very influential intellectuals sometimes have that kind of view about philosophy. For example, Stephen Hawking, Lawrence Krauss, and Neil deGrasse Tyson have claimed that philosophy is obsolete, unproductive, and an obstacle to genuine inquiry. Even some professional philosophers, even inside philosophy, even some professional philosophers think that philosophy as it is normally practiced, sometimes called armchair philosophy, is outdated. For example, and you have there, you have her right in the photo there, Patricia Churchland, a famous neurophilosopher, which is how they called those that are philosophers and neuroscientists. Well, she thinks that philosophy is some sort of proto-science, and she advocates for an approach that integrates philosophy with scientific endeavor, with science, and she dismisses all other approaches to philosophy. Now, these criticisms to philosophy can be summarized in two different claims. One is to say, look, philosophy is obsolete. Let's just forget about it, get rid of it. Let's eliminate it from the curriculum, from our universities, and that's it. It's worthless. The second claim would be to say, look, as we have been practicing philosophy for centuries, that doesn't work anymore. That's obsolete. What we should do is to incorporate it into science, or science should absorb it. Those are two different solutions to the same problem. Now, the question is whether we should believe the idea that philosophy is obsolete. And to answer to that question, or to that accusation, let's start with the first claim that philosophy is obsolete, so we should eliminate it. And there is a traditional way to deal with that accusation, I guess, because it's an old accusation against philosophy. And the response that you will find is that trying to philosophize your way, that criticism in fact what it's trying to do is to philosophize its way out of philosophy. Because that claim that, oh, philosophy is obsolete, so we should eliminate it, raises the question, well, why do you think that? From where do you got that idea? And all you're gonna get is some beliefs about what is worth pursuing or not, or whatever. And turns out that is based on some philosophical views, that it's not science. So the response is, look, you are, by telling me that not to do philosophy, you are in fact assuming philosophical positions already. So that's one way to respond to that accusation. In fact, what I just told you is an idea that was first expressed by Aristotle, one of the most famous Greek philosophers. So in one of his lost works, one of the works that he wrote and was destroyed, and we only have some fragments, he gives a similar response to what I just said, to someone who thinks that philosophy is not worth our time. And the argument survives in different versions. One is this that I just put there in the slide, and it says, if someone should say that one should not do philosophy, then since to do philosophy means to investigate this very thing, whether one should do philosophy or not, and it also means to pursue philosophical study by showing each of these to be appropriate for a human, we will entirely eliminate the proposal. And this is the second version. If you should do philosophy, you should do philosophy, and if you should not do philosophy, then you should do philosophy. Therefore, in every case, you should do philosophy. Now, I know what you're thinking. That looks like a silly argument, isn't it? Well, let's analyze it a little bit. So, but to do that, I have to ask, how do you know an argument is a good argument? And the answer I would be looking for is this. An argument is good, or more properly speaking, sound. That's how we would call it in philosophy, a sound argument. An argument is a good argument, a sound argument, if it is valid and all its premises are true. Now, but you're going to ask, what does that mean, right? So let me explain. To explain what a valid argument is, philosophers will say something like, an argument is valid if and only if it takes a form or a structure that makes it impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion nevertheless to be false. So any argument has premises, so there are some claims that you make that are trying to convince you that there is a conclusion that you should accept, right? And the idea is that a valid argument has certain structure that guarantees that if the premises these claims are true, then just by logic the conclusion will follow. Now, so a valid argument guarantees that if the premises are true, the conclusion must be also true. Now, this is not a small thing. Many arguments have true premises and a false conclusion. So you can have true premises and then try to derive something that is false. So I guess for Aristotle, the argument I just show you about whether to do or not philosophy, that is a valid argument, even if it looks a little bit silly. The structure of the argument is valid. Now, and I mean, well done for Aristotle. He invented logic, so at least that's the least we could expect. Now the question is whether his premises are true. Now for the first premise, and the first premise of the argument is that if you should do philosophy, then you should do philosophy. Well, that sounds pretty obviously true, but I guess there is little arguing about that first premise, because you could also say, if the sky is blue, then the sky is blue. That kind of a statement, or in this case, if you do philosophy, then you do philosophy, or if you should do philosophy, then you should do philosophy. That kind of a statement is always true. It's only repeating what you said at the beginning, and it's always true unless you are playing with words and using double two different senses of for the same word. So it's like saying 2 equals 2. So in the technical term for that kind of statement is a tautology. So if you should do philosophy, then you should do philosophy. Of course, it's trivial perhaps and silly, but true. Now, the interesting bit about the argument is the second premise. And the second premise says, if you should not do philosophy, then you should you should do philosophy. Sorry, it's wrong in the slide. Now, that might look a little bit suspicious. Why? If I shouldn't do philosophy, then I should do philosophy. How can that be true? It says, let's talk about the structure of that claim first. So that is what we call the conditional statement. And what that means is that if something is the case, then this other thing is the case. Another example is, if you work hard, then you will succeed in life. But as you can see with this example, a conditional can be false. Many people work hard and still fail. So in that, so that claim that if you work hard, then you succeed in life, that is false. Because in some cases you work hard and you do not succeed in life. Now, many famous scientists, for example, use their academic status to go and say things outside their area of expertise. And sometimes they do, they say philosophical claims. And you might say, well, you know what? They shouldn't do all that. They shouldn't do philosophy because they don't know or they don't understand what they are saying. When Richard Dawkins or Steven Pinker or the Jordan Peterson of the world go beyond their disciplines and try to do philosophy or claim things that are not in their area but are philosophical claims, they do it very badly, and bad in the sense of poorly done, the kind of thing that makes professional philosophers cringe in their seats. Perhaps these people should just shut their mouths. But perhaps Aristotle's point is exactly that the solution is not that they should not do philosophy. The Aristotle's argument is telling us that they should. It's just that they should go and study some philosophy before pontificating their overconfident and half-baked philosophical ideas. So the fact that some people do it bad or very poorly doesn't mean that you shouldn't engage in philosophy. And now perhaps Aristotle's point goes beyond that. It seems that his premise assumes that we must have good reasons to decide what we should do and what we shouldn't. And to be fair, that is not an unreasonable assumption. Then what he means is that to explain to someone why you should not do philosophy, you must give some good reasons. But giving good reasons to not do philosophy is already doing philosophy. But it's not very good philosophizing, and that's because it would be a performative contradiction. A performative contradiction arises when the content of a statement contradicts the presupposition of asserting that statement. Like saying, I am deaf. The very act of saying it presupposes that you are alive. In the same way, people that say, you should not do philosophy, let me explain you why, and I'll give you good reasons and good arguments. Well, they are doing philosophy already. Not very good philosophy, but they are already doing philosophy. Now, you're going to ask, well, okay, perhaps this little trick makes philosophy to some extent unavoidable. But what about the other criticism? Perhaps we should collapse philosophy or integrate it into science. So let's take a look at that. Oh, I forgot about this slide. This is just to summarize the philosophy's response to the first argument that philosophy should be eliminated. So it's kind of impossible, I guess. By denying that you should do philosophy, you are already doing some sort of philosophy. Now, the complaint that gives rise to this second criticism, that you should that philosophy should be absorbed by science, that criticism has more merit, I guess. Many traditional philosophical questions cannot be answered with just pure thinking or sitting in your armchair and just trying to come up with a solution. Many of the traditional questions of philosophy need to be considered with empirical evidence and scientific discoveries in mind. So they also need to listen. Sometimes philosophy also needs to listen to ordinary people who have experienced relevant situations. Let me give you two examples. One of the most important problems in philosophy is explaining the nature of our conscious mind. Since antiquity, philosophers have puzzled about the powers of the mind. It seems that it can access a realm of things that is beyond the physical. And I am not necessarily talking about religious experiences. You do not have to go that far. Think about numbers. Numbers do not seem to be physical entities. They do not have matter or place. They are not made from atoms, nor they exist inside time. Numbers do not get older with the pass of time. That sounds ridiculous. Yet, it would be very weird to say they do not exist. And our minds have access to them and other abstract entities. And by the way, numbers are a good example, because you can also you cannot say that, oh, numbers are just subjective. No, they are the same to all of us, and it seems that they are objective in the sense that they are not up to us to change them. Now, the thing is that we can think about numbers, and at the same time, our minds allow us to go around and experience the physical world. So this has led some philosophers throughout the history of philosophy to think that our minds have access to two different realms: the realms of sensory experience of bodies and sensible objects, and the realm of abstract objects that we can only experience through thinking. Now, since abstract objects are unchanging and eternal, like numbers, some philosophers thought that these entities were more real than the bodily things that we experience in the world of continuous change, of things that come to be and pass away. And given that the best scientific theories of their time they kind of were justified in thinking in that kind of way of two different worlds. Now, in the same way, it would be silly to do philosophy today without knowledge of the best scientific theories we have about the function of the brain, how evolution works, how chemical reactions are at the bottom of our feelings, emotions, and thoughts. And new evidence from experiments is always changing our understanding of human psychology and all its biases and tendencies to delude itself. Now, good philosophers have always paid attention to science of their time and to the empirical evidence available to them. So this critique to philosophy is directed to I think it's directed to a strawman version of philosophy. So in the end, I think it misses the point. It misses the target. It's not attacking philosophy in generally. In general, it's perhaps criticizing the fact that some philosophers don't pay enough attention to science, and that is bad. That results in bad philosophy. Now that has been accepted by philosophers throughout its history. Now, the fact that philosophy should pay attention to science and empirical evidence, does that justify that philosophy must be absorbed by science? Well, why not the other way around, you might ask? Why not a collaborative approach? This is what happens in many areas, and it's a fruitful approach. Now, it does not necessarily work for every philosophical question. It works for philosophy of mind, perhaps, and political philosophy, ethics, and some applied areas. But there are philosophical questions where there is no empirical evidence or experiment to help. Some philosophy is theoretical, conceptual analysis at its purest. It uses thinking in the same analytical way than science, but it tackles questions where empirical evidence is either irrelevant or just absent. Think about, for example, the philosophy of mathematics or philosophy of logic. Think about concepts like what is a property, what is a relation in the mathematical sense. What kind of science is going to absorb those questions? Even concepts in ethics and politics have a purely theoretical angle. What is the good, for example? How to define justice and freedom? Perhaps our experience of empirical evidence will help us, but up to a point. Now, I know what you're thinking. What exactly is philosophy anyway? I've been talking about arguments that try to say that philosophy is obsolete, but I haven't told you what exactly is philosophy. The reality is that it's not an easy question to answer. The word philosophy, of course, comes from the Greek philosophia, and everybody knows that that means love of wisdom. Philos, love, sophia, wisdom. But the Greeks have many words for love. For example, eros is love of the sexual desire or sexual intercourse. Eros is related to that. In the case of there is another word that they use, which is agape, and that means love more generally, the one that could be directed to brothers or children and God. Philia is the word for affection, for friendship, dispassionate, virtuous love. Philos comes from the same root and as the noun of friend. So philosophy means friend of wisdom. Philosophers are the loyal friends of wisdom. Now, the word philosophy and philosopher was coined in contrast with Sophia and Sophos, which simply mean wisdom and wise person. Philosophers desire wisdom, but do not necessarily claim to have it. Philosophers do not claim to be wise nor possess perfect wisdom. Because it seems that anybody could claim to be wise and possess wisdom. And some people succeed in persuading people that that is the case. But philosophers are the kind of people who would go and ask questions to those who claim to possess wisdom and knowledge and cross-examine their views. This is what Socrates did and why he became famous and was ultimately killed. But wisdom in those times meant all and any kind of knowledge. From engineering, chemistry and cosmology, poetry, the mastery of art of war, writing persuasively, and the knowledge about how to be good. Today, many people use the word philosophy to mean their guiding principles for action or something like that. Like when someone says, my philosophy of life is live long or die young and have fun or whatever. In academia, philosophy today means something more precise, but very broad. It used to mean the intellectual tradition that started with the Greeks and developed into a discipline in the Roman Empire and later in medieval Europe and then European nations and colonies and so on. Now, that is a very old-fashioned understanding of philosophy. The excuse used to be that the intellectual tradition in Europe is uniquely critical, reflective, and systematic, but that does not stand scrutiny. If you read Buddhist texts or Indian Vedas, the Chinese intellectual tradition, and many others, you find many instances of critical, reflective, and systematic thinking. But also, if you have a look at canonical text in the European tradition, not all are as reflective and systematic as advertised. And sometimes the European canon leaves out many interesting contributions from women, people of color, and other minorities that have been writing and debating all sorts of interesting ideas. This has led many to use philosophy in a wider sense that includes the intellectual traditions of many other cultures apart from European thinking. But that, I guess, leads us to the question of what is philosophy today? For many, philosophy is the study of the most general and fundamental questions and the body of knowledge that constitutes the history of trying to answer those questions. Some philosophers see this as a kind of conceptual engineering, as the pure science of clarifying concepts and their relationships. For some, that is too narrow a definition, and philosophy is all about that, but it also includes a vocational aspect, an existential commitment to become a better person. This explains why some professional philosophers were or are role examples, but also why some philosophers are the opposite, are very badly behaved, because they have different conceptions of what philosophy entails. I guess, in a way, you do not need to be nice to use all your intelligence in some conceptual analysis. In fact, many professional philosophers become intellectual bullies. But this is somehow a childish, foolish, and unprofessional way to behave. So here we will do philosophy as a collaborative, kind, and compassionate endeavor. I will talk about the tools, skills, rules, and set of attitudes we need for doing philosophy in the lectures. But for now, I will just give you a quick summary of what I have covered in a perhaps unclear way. But before I do that, I guess I have to talk about some of the ways people try to divide philosophy into different subdisciplines or parts. So some philosophers reject the idea of dividing philosophy into parts, or at least argue that those parts are interconnected to such extent that it is misguided to try to separate them. Plato's dialogues, for example, often begin with an ethical question that soon leads to a political philosophy question, and then requires some logic and talks about the nature of reality and the cosmos, and all is treated as relevant topics to go back and answer the original question. Now, it is true that we can distinguish different areas of philosophy. I think a useful way of thinking about it is like the colors of the gradient. What we call the parts of philosophy are distinct areas, but the boundaries are not so sharp between them. It's more like a porous and sometimes blurry frontier. Some questions are located somewhere, I guess, in the gradient, and answer them requires a combination of different areas. For example, some philosophers work on a topic called epistemic justice. This combines the study of knowledge, which is epistemology, and political justice and ethics. Some questions here include the right to access information or injustices committed because of someone's implicit bias. Another example might be that the discussion about whether we have free will. It implies metaphysics in the sense of, it deals with abstract concepts, but also it requires philosophy of physics and has repercussions on philosophical anthropology and ethics. To conclude this lecture, the summary of what I have said is there. You cannot get rid of philosophy. Philosophy is unavoidable, and the only choice is between doing it bad or trying to learn it and engage properly with the questions and the answers that philosophers have tried to propose over time. Then we learn that a sound argument is one whose structure is valid and its premises are true. An argument is valid if its structure makes it impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion nevertheless to be false. And good philosophy, we learned that good philosophy pays attention to science and evidence when it is relevant, but cannot be absorbed by science. The word philosophy comes from the Greek, but today it refers to many intellectual traditions around the world. And some people think it's just about conceptual analysis, whereas other people think that it has a much more vocational aspect that requires you to put some effort into becoming a better person. And at the end, you learn that the main parts of philosophy are interconnected, that sometimes philosophical questions require you to use different parts of philosophy. And that's it. Thank you very much.